Where does the practice of writing the Rebbe through the Igros come from? Did the Rabbeim do this with their predecessors? Can I write to the previous Rebbe? First of all, the most important thing for me to state is I hope people understand that you don't write letters to Igros Kodesh, you write letters to the Rebbe. You put it in Igros Kodesh, but you write a letter to the Rebbe. And misunderstanding that is very serious. You don't write letters to books. Secondly, obviously what's forthcoming, what follows is my understanding and my opinion, and that's all. When the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, the Rebbe talked about remaining Mekusher, continuing to his kashas to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he used incredibly powerful words to the effect, in 101 different ways, that the Rebbe is still here, the Rebbe is still alive, he can come through the door, he can come through the window, implying not only a concept of spiritual living, but even a concept of actual living, of physical living. And he talked a lot about retaining a relationship with him and writing to him. And an oft-used expression of the Rebbe's was, Du schreib, when the Rebbe wird gefunden Weg wird entfernen. You write and the Rebbe will find a way to answer. There's a well-known story that happened in the late 30s with a Yid who lived in Paris, whose name was Rabbi Leibish Heber, Olav Shalom, and his son, who recently passed away, Rabbi Asher Heber, Olav Shalom, related that he had a question about leaving Europe. And he came to the Rebbe, the Ramash, who was living in Paris, and the Rebbe told him to write to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he sort of said to the Rebbe that that's kind of ridiculous, considering the fact that Poland was under siege at that point. And the Rebbe told him, you know, if I steht nicht, was das meint der Rebbe, you don't understand what a Rebbe means. Du schreib, the Rebbe wird gefunden a Weg wird entfernen. You write, the Rebbe will find a way to respond. The story was that they went to the telegraph office, they wrote a telegram, which of course was never sent. The person at the counter, the cashier, laughed at them when they told them that they wanted to send the telegram to Poland. The bottom line is he woke up the next day with absolute clarity that the right thing to do was move to the United States. He lost a big business, but he saved himself, his wife, and all of his children, saved his family. And that's an earlier source of this phrase, Du schreib, the Rebbe wird gefunden a Weg wird entfernen. You write, the Rebbe will find a way to respond. In Tafshin Yud, the Rebbe would use this often, and I understand, at least in some cases, that when the Rebbe said, Du schreib, when the Rebbe wird gefunden a Weg wird entfernen, you write, and the Rebbe will find a way to respond, the Rebbe meant himself, that he'll get the answer. Like I think Rabbi Yochanan Gordon told the Rebbe that he can go to the oil, he can ask questions, but he can't get answers, and the Rebbe almost told him explicitly that he'll get him the answer. There's a simple thing even with Rashag, the Rebbe's brother-in-law, that he said that he goes to the oil and he doesn't get answers, and the Rebbe said he'll bring him the answers, and the Rashag took the Rebbe incredibly seriously. He was overwhelmed by that reality, and he accepted it, and he followed, and so on and so forth. But the language of the Rebbe, Du schreib, the Rebbe wird gefunden a Weg wird entfernen, you write, and the Rebbe will find a way to respond, is not limited to that. So, for so many anash, it's become Igros. You write a letter to the Rebbe, you put it in Igros. I would imagine that either before or after you take it to the oil and you read it. By no means is it exclusively Igros. There's no requirement to put a letter in Igros Kodesh. There's no requirement to put a letter any place, right? There's an idea of neshama and neshama ne'etzeles. Neshamas have a meeting on a neshama level. When you visit the oil, when you go to the Rebbe, the neshamas meet, the neshamas talk. We ask questions with our conscious mind, using our lips or using our pen. And this is part of the neshama and neshama ne'etzeles process. And the neshama klolis, the Rebbe, the Nasi, finds a way to reach us. That's his concern, and in no means is it limited to Igros Kodesh. But there is a remez, and the remez is that when the Rebbe spoke about this idea in that year, Du schreib, when the Rebbe wird gefunden a Weg wird entfernen, you write, the Rebbe will find a way to respond. He brought a proof from Tanakh that the pasuk says, "Vayovei michtav mi Eliyahu," a letter came from Eliyahu Navi after Eliyahu was Eilu b'Sa'ara Hashamayma, after Eliyahu literally rose up into heaven with a chariot of fire. And the Rebbe explained, based on the Psukim, that this was a letter that came from Elisha, who was Eliyahu's Talmud. But it was a michtav mi Eliyahu, a letter from Eliyahu Navi. And the Rebbe made the point that we find here an example of a tzaddik that begashmis you don't have direct access, and the michtav comes mi Eliyahu. So I believe that this is a lashon, nefil, a lashon, instead of a remez, that because the example that the Rebbe brought for the Rebbe finding a way to answer is, and a michtav, it's become the Igros Kodesh, or to say it in more lofty words, that Afa Pisha Einam Neviim, B'nei Neviim Heim, like the Gemara says, Yidden Beklal, Chsidim, have a chush, Tutu Trefet Avemes, like the Rebbe said. So, whether they intended it or not, the idea that the medium through which a michtav comes mi Eliyahu is through Igros Kodesh. There's one thing I need to say, or I guess two things I need to say. Number one, we know the incredible stories that have emerged from the Igros Kodesh, and they're overwhelming, they're incredible. And number two, and this is very, very important, that it's not a joke. If you're putting a letter in Igros Kodesh, writing a letter to the Rebbe, you put it in Igros Kodesh, if you're not prepared to listen, don't put it in. Because it's better not to ask than to ask and not to listen. There are 101 stories that support that. So don't think that because it's Igros, it's different than when you wrote a letter to the Rebbe 40 years ago and you brought it into the Maskiris and you either did or didn't get an answer b'ksav. If you're not prepared to listen, don't put it in Igros. It's too serious. It's too important. And I know personally what happens when you put a letter in Igros Kodesh. You get an answer, you didn't like it, and you don't listen. It's not good.